Hi, I'm Sonia Uyterhoeven at the New York Botanical Garden. Today I'm in the Nolan glasshouses for our living collections where we grow our orchids. Today I'd like to show you a few tips on how to repot your orchids. So your first question is probably, when do I repot my orchid and why would I repot my orchid? You repot your orchid essentially when it's outgrown its pot. So you can see here that this Oncidium hybrid is actually literally crawling out of its pot. Now the best time to repot your orchid is in the spring, and you can see here on this orchid it's showing new growth right here and these little green tips on the roots. When the roots start to grow, it's a perfect time to take your orchid out and put it in its new home. What type of potting mediums are we planning on using today? These are the typical potting mediums that you would use. One here is sphagnum moss, and you can see here it's almost like a sponge. It really retains the moisture very well. Sometimes it actually retains too much moisture, and it's important to put styrofoam peanuts in it to keep it good drainage. And the other classic mixes here are a standard orchid mix. I have here a coarse fir bark mix and a fine mix. And you can see in the mixes there's three different colors. There's the fir bark pieces, there's charcoal, and charcoal helps keep it nice and clean. And then there's also perlite. And for the gardeners in the crowd, you know that perlite is for good drainage. So what type of pots would you like to repot your orchid in? It's really up to you. Terracotta is really nice, heavy, and it also breathes, so it's wonderful for good drainage and aeration. And plastic, on the other hand, if your home is extremely dry, is great to keep the moisture in. The choice is yours. When you're working with your orchids, it's important that your tools are clean. Orchids are susceptible to viruses, so I have a few things here. I have rubbing alcohol, and the rubbing alcohol, if you soak your tools for about 10 minutes, get them nice and clean. Here at the garden, I actually have a propane torch where I torch my pruners to keep it nice and clean. And also for the homeowner, an easy option is a disposable utility blade, and these work perfectly fine when working with an orchid. So you have two main types of orchids. You have a monopodial orchid, and this is an orchid that grows upright, and you have a sympodial orchid here, and this orchid essentially crawls along the pot, growing at a horizontal. Now these orchids are repotted in two very different ways. I first want to show you this monopodial orchid, this Phalaenopsis here, and the reason why I want to show you this is a very typical way that they're potted and they're shipped these days. You'll notice that the pot is extremely flimsy and it's plastic, and the roots are also packed in sphagnum moss. Now this is great for the shippers, but it's not so good for you. You can see here I have these nice, healthy white and green roots. They're nice and plump here. These are healthy, but what happens most of the time is with the plastic pot here and also this dense sphagnum moss that often the roots start to rot out. So you'll see right here that these roots have desiccated and rotted. What I would do when you buy an orchid that's potted like this is water it very carefully when it's in flower, and once it's finished flowering, clear out all of the moss and repot it again in a looser mix. So now we're actually going to repot the orchid, and the orchid that I've chosen today is this Oncidium type orchid that's starting to crawl out of its pot. And you remember that it's a perfect time to repot it now. The growth is starting and the root tips, and you can see these tiny little green tips on here. The roots are just starting to grow, so it's ready to be repotted. Now the easiest thing to do is to take it, to squeeze the pot, and to see if you can gently remove it out of the pot. And this one actually removes quite easily. So you can see here it's important to clean out all of the mix. If you can't get all of it out, don't worry, but we're cleaning out the majority of the mix here within the root system. And then also it's a good time to take a look at the orchid, and I have here on the back the old growth. These are the old pseudobulbs, and here I have the fresh new growth right here on the front. Some of these old pseudobulbs are so old they can be removed. So I'm just going to remove them. I think I'll also remove this one right here. And now I have this nice clean root system. And notice that some of the roots here are extremely long. If I'd like to, I can cut these back. The long roots will just twirl around in the pot. They may get a little too long. Although the pot I'm putting them in, I think it's actually going to be perfectly fine to just leave them today and repot them into the pot. Now the general rule for repotting an orchid is it likes this fairly small home. I think this pot here is going to be a little too small. It's actually getting fairly close. I'm going to actually put it into this larger pot so that it has room to grow and spread. It needs about 1 inch to move in all directions. So what I do is I put the oldest growth at the back of the pot, and I have the new growth coming in and moving into the center of the pot. And I'd like enough space there for it to grow so that it can stay in this pot for about 2 years. What I'd like to do is I'd like to plant the orchid at the surface level so that it's running right across the surface. And what I'm going to do first is take out the old mix and clean up this mess that I've made. And now bring in my fresh new mix. With the new mix, I've actually soaked it so that it's not dusty and it's easy to work with. It's also nice and hydrated. And what I'm going to do is I'm slowly going to ease it down into the pot. I can push it in with my fingers. I'm pushing it through the root system, and I'm also rotating as I go. Getting it down on all sides. And keeping the orchid, remembering to keep the orchid at surface level so that it doesn't sink down too deep. If you have the orchid too deep in the potting mix, it will start to rot away. Now with this coarse mix, I have wonderful drainage, so I can pack it down slightly. If I'm working with a fine mix, I have to be careful, and if I'm working with the sphagnum moss, I have to be very delicate about how I pack it down. But you can see here, the orchid is in the pot, and it's nice and stable in the pot. It's nice and firm in here. It's not going to shake around. And here I have my orchid repotted in a nice new home with plenty of space to grow for the next few years. Here at Shop in the Garden, our knowledgeable staff can help you find the perfect orchid. Remember, when you're repotting the orchid, to write down your repotting date on the label. If you'd like to find a beautiful orchid, please come and visit our shop. We also offer garden classes from beginner to expert level. Visit our website at nybg.org, and thank you for joining us today.